a real conversation Canadians need to start having more openly is medical assistance in dying. It's not the most happy go lucky policy, but I think our politicians are putting forward ideas that I would argue most of us probably don't agree with. And we wish there was a forum to discuss these things in a very open manner. So I'm hopeful that this video will help set the tone and kind of like the overall picture for MAiD, how it is in Canada right now, and why you as a Canadian should actually be really concerned about this. Now, MAiD came into effect in 2016 here in Canada, and it was to provide those with grievous and irremediable medical conditions the choice to end their suffering. This is the federal government's words. But there's two distinct tracks with MAiD, each with its own criteria. So track 1 is for individuals whose natural death is reasonably foreseeable. It requires fewer procedural safeguards, reflecting the imminent nature of their condition. Track 2 is much more controversial. It applies to those whose deaths are not reasonably foreseeable. It demands, and this is for mental, emotional health, this track demands a minimum reflection period of 90 days and involves more stringent criteria aimed at ensuring that the decision is thoroughly considered. So track 1, your death is reasonably foreseeable. Track 2, your death is not reasonably foreseeable, but there's other checks in place. Now, track 2 is where a lot of debate really comes from. And so I wanted to chat a little bit about that. And again, it's about your mental health and choosing medical assistance in dying. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, Christopher, why is it controversial that someone who's going through mental illness choose to end their own lives? Again, through the government. And so there's a couple. The first is that there is a lot of research that has been done where someone who's going through an episodic moment, and I don't mean to disparage a mental health crisis, but someone who is going through episodes of depression, anxiety, etc., can very well come out of that and no longer exhibit suicidal tendencies and wanting to end their own life. So, for example, someone may be in a horrific accident and injure their spinal cord and become a quadriplegic. Initially, that person may be very suicidal. But what research has found is that after about 18 to 24 months of consistent, going to therapy, going to focus groups, going to group sessions, having proper supports in place, etc., that person is less likely to consider suicidal ideation or ending their own life. So that is one of many examples that psychologists show when it comes to track 2, that 90 days isn't enough time. There's a multitude of complexity when it comes to mental and emotional health that can be, I hate to say remediated, that can be addressed in a meaningful way. And there's a lot of research on this. Edna Foa has done extensive research on exposure therapy. So if you are going through something really challenging in your life, you've lost a lot of money, you've lost a loved one, etc., you're going through all of those emotions, Edna Foa's work shows that you can actually get over that by documenting explicitly what you're feeling, repeating that back, playing that back to yourself over and over again, over a series of weeks, etc. And that very traumatic event is very easily overcome. Again, overcome is perhaps the wrong word, but you're able to lead a very fulfilling life despite the trauma that has happened to you. So that's the real issue with track 2. It's that death is not certain, and there's this idea that because death is not certain, the idea is that the doctors should not be prescribing MAiD because their whole purpose is to preserve life. I think the other complexity to this also is there are people who are going through real mental and emotional distress, and some believe that by not providing MAiD, it dismisses the distress that they're going through, and that ownership over their life and when they want to end it should be theirs. I think the real question becomes, at what point does it become state sponsored? I think that is the question. So, like, it is not criminal to attempt suicide. That is something that is not a criminal act. I didn't know that, by the way. It is not criminal to attempt suicide. But um, the question becomes, should the state assist you in ending your life? And I think that's like a moral and ethical question. There's many considerations. So let's take some real world examples. There was a middle-aged woman with a progressive neurological condition, not terminal, but very debilitating. This woman chose to pursue MAiD under track 2 after years of treatment, reflecting a well-considered decision made in consultation with family, doctors, and mental health specialists. Um, how do we provide safeguards against potential abuses, but also recognize that that individual was going through had been going through a distressful series, and despite treatments, they were not effective. So it's one thing to say that there are treatments that are effective, but is it effective for everybody? That that's not the case. And how do you instill a sense of hope into someone who's tried 3, 4, 5 different types of treatments? I'm not an expert on this, but I would say that all it takes probably is 2 or 3 treatment scenarios for someone to start dismissing whether or not MAiD whether or not psychological intervention is worth it. So an example that I'll use is, going to a doctor, going to a specialist, going to a doctor. The first thing you're met with matters. So if the receptionist is rude, if it was difficult finding the location, if um, it was really terrible weather that day, all of those things play a factor into your initial experience. And if that initial experience that um, is in any way negative or perceived to be negative for someone who's going through a depressive or very anxious moment in their life, stressful moment, I can see how that would really challenge someone to basically not want to continue with that program. So contextual factors are very important. Environmental factors are very important. That happens a couple of times, and then I can understand why someone mentally makes the consideration that this is no longer for me. I do not want to see more treatment options. I just want to end my life. But we have to remember, so I think the other thing we have to remember too is Canada's relatively new to this. Since 2016, I believe the number's 30 to 40,000 deaths since 2016. We're one of the leading countries in the world when it comes to deaths from medical assistance in dying. I believe it's 4 to 5% of all deaths are from MAiD. And considering that it was only legal as of 2016, I anticipate that number is going to go up quite steadily over the next few years and into the next 10 years even. So it's a question we have to really wrestle with as a country, specifically track 2, when death is not certain. And I say this because we are a country that struggles with anxiety, stress, and depression. As a country, we struggle with that because I think, well, first of all, North American life is very stressful. We've attached a lot of purpose to things outside ourselves, whether it be material wealth, partners, spouse relationships, etc. And I think as a result of that focus, anxiety, stress, depression rates go up. Our inflation and interest rates are very high. I'm certain that drug and alcohol use is very high. I'm certain that there are other things that people are doing to themselves and others. I wouldn't be surprised if crime is higher, robberies, car theft is higher. I wouldn't be surprised by any of those stats, given the economic environment we find ourselves in. So MAiD, as a result, may very well fluctuate based on the economy as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if this year MAiD is just slightly more than previous years because of the economic environment that we're in. And let's also not forget that our politics are very polarizing right now. And whether you're a liberal or conservative or somewhere in between, NDP, Bloc, etc., there's a lot of vitriol out there. There's a lot of that happening too. So that's lending itself to anxiety, stress, and depression. So I want to start the conversation on MAiD. I actually did a 3-part series on MAiD on my podcast. I'll leave a link below. Check it out. Let me know what you think on MAiD. Do you think that this is a good idea, especially track 2, or not? Again, the question becomes, should it be state sponsored? Let me know in the comment section below.